It started on a chilly October evening, a night that began like any other but ended with an undercurrent of something unspoken. I was walking to my car after a long day at work when my phone vibrated unexpectedly. The screen flashed an unfamiliar number. I paused under the amber glow of a streetlight, my breath visible in the cool air. I never imagined that a simple call from an unknown source could be the opening note of a symphony of secrets and lies. My name is Michael Carter, a 38-year-old project manager living in a quiet suburb just outside of Atlanta. I'd built a life that, on the surface, seemed stable. A decent job, a comfortable home, and a marriage with Emily of 15 years. We had weathered life's small storms together, our routine as steady as the ticking clock in our living room. But that night, as I stood alone on a deserted sidewalk, something shifted. I answered the call, expecting a telemarketer or perhaps an automated message. Instead, a husky voice, calm yet laced with an odd familiarity, simply said, "We need to talk." Before I could ask who was calling or why, the line went dead and I shoved the phone into my pocket and walked the remaining blocks to my car. The encounter left me unsettled, a feeling that I couldn't quite shake off. Inside the quiet solitude of my car, I replayed the moment over and over. It wasn't a threat, I told myself, it was just a wrong number. And yet, that fleeting moment of uncertainty lingered as I drove home to home. The evening routine awaited. Emily was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The aroma of roasted chicken and herbs filled the air, a familiar scent that usually signaled comfort and home. I tried to act normal, but the earlier call had planted a seed of distraction in my mind. We sat down to eat, and as we exchanged pleasantries about our day, I couldn't help but notice a subtle distance in her smile, a fleeting shadow in her eyes that I dismissed as the fatigue of a long day. After dinner, I sank into my favorite recliner with a book, attempting to push the mysterious call to the back of my mind. The television murmured in the background, news of a rising local crime wave barely registering against the hum of everyday life. Still, my thoughts kept circling back to that voice, a voice that promised a conversation laden with implications. The next morning dawned clear and brisk. At the office, I was greeted by my colleague, Lauren Bennett, who was new to the team. With her bright eyes and confident smile, she seemed to breathe an energy into the otherwise staid environment of our department. Lauren's presence was a breath of fresh air in the humdrum of deadlines and project briefs. She was articulate, efficient, and had an uncanny ability to simplify even the most convoluted tasks. I found myself drawn to her straightforward manner, a stark contrast to the complexities I was beginning to sense in my own life. We were soon paired together on a new project for one of our biggest clients. As we brainstormed in a conference room filled with whiteboards and sticky notes, I was struck by her professionalism and insight. Our discussions were brisk and productive, each idea building upon the last without a hint of anything personal. Yet there was a spark, a connection that wasn't there before. I reminded myself that we were simply colleagues, nothing more than two professionals solving a problem. The day passed in a blur of creative energy and the steady clicking of keyboards, and by the end of it, I was back at my desk with a sense of accomplishment that belied the nagging feeling from that October night. That evening, as I drove home, the autumn wind whispered secrets through the trees lining the quiet suburban streets. I wondered about the call again. Had I imagined it? Could it have been a prank? Or was it the first ripple in a much larger disturbance beneath the calm surface of my life? At home, Emily was waiting. We had a brief conversation about the day's events, and she mentioned a meeting she had later that night with an old friend. I nodded, offering a smile that I hoped conveyed normalcy. Yet, even as I settled into bed, the questions from the previous night churned in my mind. I tossed and turned, the unknown caller echoing in my thoughts like a refrain I couldn't quite place. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on work and the comfort of routine. However, the unsettling feeling persisted. There were small, almost imperceptible changes. Emily's distracted gaze when she thought I wasn't looking, an uncharacteristic hesitation in her tone when I casually asked about her meeting, and the way my phone would light up with messages from unknown numbers that I dismissed too quickly. I pushed these worries aside, attributing them to the stress of a demanding project and the simple fatigue of everyday life. But underneath it all, the memory of that call clung to me like a shadow. I began to notice that sometimes, in the middle of routine tasks, my mind would wander back to that moment on the sidewalk. It was as if my subconscious was alerting me to something I couldn't articulate, a whisper of trouble that I was too stubborn to heed. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself seated at my desk long after most had left the office. The building was nearly empty, and the silence was punctuated only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. As I gathered my notes and prepared to leave, an email popped up in my inbox from an unfamiliar sender. The subject line read, "You'll know when the time is right." My heart skipped a beat. Had the mysterious caller followed up? My instincts urged me to open it, but I hesitated, aware that sometimes the unknown is best left unexplored until it reveals itself naturally. I decided to take the email with me, resolving to open it later in the safety of my home. The drive back was a mix of apprehension and resolve, the city lights blurring past as I replayed the day's events in my mind. When I finally arrived home, I sat in the living room with the email open on my laptop. The message was brief, cryptic. "Not everything is as it seems. Look closer." No signature, no further explanation. That night, as I lay in bed with the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me, I couldn't help but feel that life was slowly unspooling a narrative far more intricate than the one I had always believed it to be. I drifted into a restless sleep, the words from the email echoing in my dreams, and the promise of a conversation that would change everything lingering just beyond the horizon of my understanding. Little did I know that this was only the beginning, a prelude to events that would challenge the very foundation of my existence. In the coming days, the line between routine and betrayal would blur, and I would be forced to confront truths I never imagined. For now, all I had was a lingering sense of foreboding, a mystery wrapped in the guise of everyday life. And as the night deepened outside my window, I realized that sometimes, the smallest disruptions in our lives can herald the most profound changes. The call, the email, each was a subtle ripple on the surface, hinting at a storm yet to come. In the days following that cryptic email, I found myself caught in a delicate balance between routine and uncertainty. The familiar cadence of my life at home and work persisted, yet underneath, an undercurrent of tension made every ordinary moment feel charged with hidden meaning. I tried to focus on my responsibilities, but the unanswered questions from that evening refused to let go. The next morning brought an unexpected twist. I woke early, the first light barely penetrating the drawn curtains of our bedroom. Emily was still asleep, her soft breathing the only sound in the otherwise silent room. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, contemplating the events of the previous night, the call, the email, and the persistent sense of foreboding. With the dawn came the resolve to find answers, even if the truth might unravel the fabric of my carefully constructed life. At work, the project with Lauren took on new urgency. We were scheduled for a series of meetings with our client, and every detail mattered. Lauren was efficient and focused, her clarity in communication reinforcing my initial impression of her as a breath of fresh air amid the everyday monotony. As we reviewed the project deliverables, I couldn't help but notice subtle glances exchanged when a particular idea was mentioned, a fleeting moment that I tried to dismiss as nothing more than a reflection of our shared drive for excellence. Yet, the same glimmer of uncertainty I'd felt since that strange call seemed to echo in our brief, unguarded exchanges. Lunch was a hurried affair in the bustling break room. I attempted to shake off the lingering thoughts of the cryptic email, but even then, every overheard snippet of conversation seemed to hint at secrets lying just beneath the surface. My phone buzzed intermittently with messages, but they were just work updates. Nothing that would further complicate my already tumultuous thoughts. Still, a niggling feeling persisted, urging me to keep my eyes and ears open for any sign that something was amiss. By mid-afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. It read simply, "Meet me at the corner of 5th and Main. Come alone." There was no further instruction, no promise of clarity, only an invitation laced with uncertainty. My initial impulse was to ignore it, dismissing it as another piece of the puzzle that wasn't meant for me. But as the day wore on and I tried to immerse myself in work, the message replayed in my mind like a recurring note in a song I couldn't get out of my head. I left the office a few minutes early that day, my thoughts in a haze of conflicted emotion. The drive to the corner of 5th and Main was a short one, but the city streets felt different now. A maze of shadows and half-lit storefronts that suddenly carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. I parked a discreet distance away, ensuring I wouldn't be seen until I was ready to commit to the meeting. My heart beat steadily, each pulse a reminder that I was stepping into unknown territory. The corner was quiet, a narrow intersection with few passers-by. I leaned against the cool brick of an old building and waited. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours until a figure emerged from the dim light. A tall man with a steady gait, his face partially hidden by the brim of a hat. He approached without haste, stopping a few feet away. "Michael Carter?" he asked, his voice firm and measured. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Good. You've been wondering, haven't you?" he continued, as if reading the turmoil behind my eyes. "There's more to your story than you realize. But for now, listen carefully." Before I could respond, he handed me a small envelope. There was no explanation, no indication of who he was or how he knew my name. I took the envelope with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. The man said nothing more, then turned and melted into the night, leaving me alone on the corner with my racing thoughts. Once I was safely back in my car, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, printed in neat, unassuming type. It read, "Look into the account transactions from last month. The truth hides in the numbers." No signature, no additional context. It was a direction, a thread meant to be pulled. At that moment, I realized I had inadvertently stepped into a labyrinth of secrets, one that threatened to entangle everything I thought I knew about my life. Returning home, I was met with the mundane yet comforting routines of daily life. Emily was preparing dinner, and for a brief moment, I almost forgot the weight of the day. But as I set my briefcase aside and sat at the dining table, the instructions from that envelope echoed in my mind. I decided that once the dishes were cleared and the night settled in, I would dig into the bank statements I had been meaning to organize the following evening. After Emily had retired early to her room, I settled at my desk with my laptop open and the envelope beside me. I navigated to the online banking portal, my eyes scanning over the rows of numbers and transactions. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Regular bills, monthly deposits, and occasional transfers that fit the rhythm of everyday life. But as I clicked through the statements from the previous month, one series of transactions caught my attention. There were repeated transfers from a seemingly unrelated account, a name I didn't immediately recognize. The amounts were modest, inconspicuous enough to be overlooked, but their regularity was unsettling. I made a note of the dates and amounts, the numbers slowly forming a pattern that seemed deliberate rather than coincidental. It wasn't an enormous sum, but it was enough to signal that someone was siphoning off funds, perhaps to cover up something that wasn't entirely above board. My mind raced through the possibilities. Was this connected to the cryptic email? Could it be related to the subtle changes I'd noticed in Emily's behavior? And most importantly, what did this mysterious transfer have to do with me? The more I dug into the details, the more I realized that the puzzle was far from complete. There were discrepancies, gaps in the timeline, and transactions that defied easy explanation. The trail, while not blazing, was there. A trail that promised to lead me deeper into a web of deceit I was only beginning to comprehend. I printed out the relevant pages and spread them out on my desk, the lines of numbers a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my mind. Over the next few days, I continued my quiet investigation. I made discreet inquiries with the bank under the guise of routine account management, careful not to raise any alarms. I spent hours cross-referencing the dates and amounts, piecing together a narrative that was both familiar and foreign. Each new discovery added another layer of complexity to the situation, drawing me further into the mystery. I began to suspect that the transfers might be connected not only to finances but to a network of hidden alliances and secret arrangements that stretched beyond the confines of my marriage and everyday life. Amidst this, my interactions with Lauren at work took on a different hue. There was a shared understanding, an unspoken acknowledgement that life sometimes throws curves that require both focus and distraction. But even as we collaborated seamlessly on our project, I couldn't help but wonder if her presence was entirely coincidental. Were her insights just the product of professional brilliance, or was there something more behind the sparkling eyes that seemed to hint at shared secrets? One evening, as I sat alone in my study reviewing the printed statements, I knew I was standing at the precipice of something larger than I had ever imagined. The quiet of the night was punctuated by the low hum of the computer and the rustle of paper, each sound a reminder that reality was not as simple as it appeared. I realized that uncovering the truth would require me to delve into a world where every answer led to more questions. Yet, I was determined to follow the thread, even if it meant confronting unsettling truths about my own life as the clock ticked past midnight. I closed the folder containing the bank statements and sat back in my chair. The day had been long, the revelations subtle yet profound. I knew that I was on the verge of discovering something that would shatter the calm facade of my existence. The mysterious instructions, the unexplained transactions, they were all pieces of a puzzle that was only now beginning to reveal its picture. To end that quiet moment, with the weight of the unknown pressing on my shoulders, I resolved to continue down this path. No matter where it led, I was committed to uncovering the truth, even if it meant navigating a maze of secrets and betrayal that extended far beyond the simple rhythms of daily life. The printed statements lay spread across my desk like pieces of an intricate puzzle, each number a small clue in a mystery that was rapidly growing more complex. Determined to follow the thread, I returned to my investigation with renewed focus, leaving little room for distractions. Every transaction, every date, and every amount was now under scrutiny. I set aside my work projects and personal routine for the time being, devoting myself entirely to the trail hidden in those figures. Early the next morning, I revisited the bank's online portal. Using the printed pages as a guide, I cross-checked every line with my online records. It wasn't long before I noticed a secondary detail that had escaped me before. A pattern of payments to a company called Crescent Solutions. The transfers were small, almost unnoticeable amid the routine inflow and outflow of funds, but they were consistent. I decided to dig deeper into Crescent Solutions, searching for any mention of the company in local directories and online business registries. It turned out that Crescent Solutions was registered to an address on a quiet street in Marietta, not far from where I lived. The company's website offered no further insight, just a few lines about providing administrative support and financial services to small businesses. It was vague enough to invite further suspicion. I made a note of the address and resolved to visit it in the coming days, if only to see what kind of operation was operating behind closed doors. Meanwhile, life at home continued its steady beat. Emily went about her day with a quiet efficiency, but I couldn't help but notice that she had become more protective of her phone and her schedule. When I casually mentioned that I was rechecking some old bank statements, she merely nodded and returned to her own tasks. The house, once a sanctuary of familiarity, now hummed with an undercurrent of unspoken tension. I refrained from voicing my suspicions, choosing instead to let the numbers lead the way. At work, my interactions with Lauren maintained their professional decorum, though our conversations occasionally skirted around topics that hinted at shared frustrations about the unpredictability of life. One afternoon, while reviewing project drafts in the break room, I overheard her mention that she had once encountered a situation involving secret transfers at a previous job. Her tone was matter-of-fact, and while she did not volunteer further details, the remark struck me as oddly prescient. It was as if she, too, had a familiarity with the kind of covert financial maneuvers I was now scrutinizing. After work that day, I took the longer route home, passing through neighborhoods I rarely visited. The drive gave me time to think about the upcoming visit to the Crescent Solutions address. I wasn't sure what I would find. A rundown office, a busy corporate building, or perhaps nothing at all. The uncertainty was less important than the need to follow the trail wherever it led. The following morning, armed with a notepad and a discreet voice recorder for my own records, I set out for Marietta. The address was a modest building, tucked away on a quiet street. The exterior was unremarkable. A single-story structure with a faded sign bearing the company's name. Parking a few blocks away, I walked the rest of the distance, my steps measured and deliberate. I could see a few people entering and exiting the building, but there was nothing overtly suspicious about the scene. I entered the building under the guise of a prospective client. The reception area was small, with a single desk and a polite attendant who greeted me warmly. I explained that I was interested in learning more about their services, carefully steering the conversation toward administrative support and financial management. The attendant, a woman with sharp eyes and an easy smile, handed me a brochure. I thanked her and requested a meeting with a representative, hoping to glean any hints about why my account might have been linked to Crescent Solutions. About 15 minutes later, I was ushered into a small office where a man in his mid-40s introduced himself as Robert Mills, a senior advisor at Crescent Solutions. Robert was courteous, his tone measured as he explained the services the company offered. He mentioned that many small business owners use their services to handle routine financial transactions and manage payroll, a perfectly ordinary explanation that, on the surface, explained the periodic transfers I'd noted. Yet, something in his demeanor felt rehearsed, as if he were reciting a well-practiced script that I asked a few pointed questions about the origin of the funds and the purpose behind the transfers. Robert's eyes flickered briefly, and he offered a vague explanation about routine fees and administrative adjustments. While he maintained a calm exterior, I sensed that he was holding back. I left the office with the brochure in hand and a mind swirling with possibilities. The encounter had raised more questions than it answered, but it confirmed one thing. There was a layer to this financial arrangement that wasn't part of my known life. Back at home, I began to compare the dates from Crescent Solutions transactions with my own records. I noticed that many of these transfers coincided with days when Emily claimed to be out for meetings or social engagements. The alignment was too consistent to ignore. I recalled the way her phone was now her constant companion, and how she would sometimes take a call in hushed tones. A sense of unease grew within me, not because of any overt confession or proof, but because the numbers painted a picture that didn't match the narrative I'd been told all these years. That evening, I organized the relevant documents and printed out additional statements. I laid them side by side with the brochure from Crescent Solutions and the notes I jotted down during my visit. The patterns were emerging slowly but unmistakably. The transactions, the timing, the alignment with Emily's absences. It all hinted at a double life that I hadn't anticipated. The thought was as startling as it was painful that I spent the next day retracing Emily's steps subtly. I checked the calendar on her phone when she left it unattended, and it confirmed several meetings at places I had never heard her mention before. There were also receipts from hotels and restaurants that she had never explained. Each new piece of evidence reinforced the growing realization that my world was built on carefully guarded secrets. Yet, I continued my investigation discreetly. I refrained from confronting Emily directly. Instead, I gathered information, making sure that every step was measured and deliberate. I revisited the bank portal again, focusing on transactions that occurred on those specific dates. I even called my bank under the pretense of routine account questions, hoping to extract more details about the transfers linked to Crescent Solutions. The bank representative confirmed that the payments were categorized as service fees, but offered no further explanation. It was as if the system itself was designed to obscure the truth that I in the quiet hours of the night. As I reviewed my growing collection of evidence, the weight of what I had discovered pressed heavily on me. The line between suspicion and certainty was growing thinner by the day. Every number, every receipt, every calendar entry was a brushstroke painting a picture of a betrayal that had been unfolding silently in the background of my life. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the computer and the rustle of printed pages the only sounds in the room. I knew that the truth was now firmly planted in these records. Yet the implications were vast and far-reaching. I resolved to follow every lead, to leave no stone unturned in uncovering the full extent of what was hidden beneath the surface. The night deepened outside, and with it, my determination to get to the bottom of this mystery grew stronger. I had started this journey seeking answers about a strange phone call and an enigmatic email, but I now found myself staring down a path of deceit that reached into the very heart of my marriage and my everyday life. And so, with a steady hand and a mind focused on facts, I prepared for the next steps. The investigation was far from over, and the true extent of the hidden betrayal was yet to be revealed. All I could do was continue piecing together the fragments of evidence, trusting that each new discovery would lead me closer to the truth. I arrived home one cool evening with the evidence spread out in my mind and on paper. Every receipt, bank statement, and calendar entry now formed a clear picture, Emily's frequent meetings were not mere coincidences, but carefully orchestrated rendezvous. The mysterious transfers to Crescent Solutions, the unexplained hotel receipts, and the consistent gaps in her schedule. All of it pointed to a secret that had grown too large to ignore. That night, after Emily had prepared a quiet dinner as she always did, I knew it was time for the conversation I had been dreading. I cleared the table, placed the printed documents on a clean sheet, and sat down across from her in the living room. A room that had once symbolized comfort and routine, now the stage for an unavoidable confrontation. "Emily," I began, my tone steady and factual. "I've been reviewing our bank statements and our schedules. The transactions to Crescent Solutions. The days when you were away. Everything adds up." I slid a folder across the table containing the evidence I had collected. There was no dramatic outburst, just a measured delivery of facts. Emily's eyes flickered to the papers. She took a long moment before speaking. "Michael, I didn't expect you to notice." Her voice was quiet, devoid of the flourish of remorse or overt panic. Instead, it carried a simple acceptance that what was happening had finally come to light. I continued, laying out the timeline. The consistent transfers on days when she was supposedly attending meetings, the receipts from hotels and upscale restaurants that I'd never seen before. "Explain this, Emily," I said, my voice firm, not laced with anger but with an insistence on clarity. For a long minute, she said nothing. Finally, she sighed and admitted, "It's been going on for nearly 6 months. I've been seeing someone else, Richard." She paused as if to let the name sink in. "I met him through a mutual friend. First, it was just dinner and conversation. But then it grew into something more." I listened, each word measured against the undeniable evidence on the table. There were no dramatics, only a quiet confession that stripped away the pretense of our everyday life. "And Crescent Solutions?" I asked. "It's a front," she replied evenly. "Richard was using a business account to keep our meetings and expenses separate. I never wanted you to know, but it got out of hand." Her explanation was brief, a series of simple facts with no attempts to delve into justification. It was all there. The truth laid out plainly. I took a deep breath and gathered the remaining documents. I found everything in the bank statements. Every time you had a meeting, there was a transfer, a hotel receipt, or a restaurant bill. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to look. I needed to know. She looked at me without a trace of the desperation I had imagined. "I never meant to hurt you, Michael. It just happened. I felt trapped in a life that wasn't mine anymore." Even as she spoke these words, I noted the absence of psychological overtures, only the bare facts of what had occurred. The conversation continued with the two of us reviewing each piece of evidence side by side. There was no dramatic explosion, only a steady, relentless acknowledgement of betrayal. As she recounted dates and details, it became clear that her affair had been meticulously hidden, managed through financial channels and evasive explanations. Richard's involvement was evident in every entry and every unexplained expense. There was no point where emotions exploded, no shouting, no breakdowns. Instead, we both stood in the stark light of reality. I explained how the cryptic phone call and subsequent messages had led me on this investigative path. "I didn't understand it at first," I said. "I thought it was a wrong number, or a mistake. But then the clues all started to line up." I paused, my voice as calm as the evidence before us. Emily's response was measured. "I know, Michael. I'm sorry." There was no grand declaration of regret, just a quiet admission that my life had been intertwined with her secrets. The room was filled with the sound of silence, punctuated only by the rustle of paper and the ticking of the clock. It was a moment where every detail, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sounds of the neighborhood, seemed to underline the finality of what had been revealed. In that quiet space, I realized that every clue, every small transfer and calendar entry, had been building to this inevitable crossroads. There was no hidden motive or dramatic backstory, only the reality of an affair meticulously concealed by routine and financial sleight of hand. The investigation had not been about passion or the complexities of the human mind, it had been about uncovering the facts. The evidence was irrefutable. The confrontation lasted only a short time, but its implications were far-reaching. We both understood that nothing could restore the life we once knew. I wasn't sure what the next step would be, but I knew that the truth had to be acknowledged, no matter how inconvenient it was. I decided then to step away from the life that had been built on half-truths, preparing to move forward in a way that honored the integrity of what I discovered. After our conversation, I locked the documents away. In the days that followed, I took deliberate steps to secure my finances and personal records. I contacted the bank to ensure that any further transactions would be flagged, and I began to sort out the details of our separation quietly and efficiently. I did not seek to delve into the psychology of what had gone wrong. I focused only on the tangible facts, the dates, the numbers, the receipts, and let them guide my actions. The final chapter of this ordeal came not with a dramatic finale but with a quiet exit from the life I had known. I packed a few essentials, closed the door on our home, and took a long drive out of town. The journey was silent, each mile a testament to the weight of the truth I had uncovered. There was no bitterness in my thoughts, only a clear-eyed resolve to rebuild my life on a foundation of honesty that I knew that moving forward would not be easy. There would be conversations with lawyers, discussions about dividing assets, and the inevitable questions from friends and family. Yet, in that moment, I felt a sense of clarity that had eluded me for so long. I was no longer a man living in the fog of hidden transactions and covert meetings. I had seen the facts laid out plainly, and I was ready to take responsibility for my future. Standing at the crossroads of truth, I recognized that some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually surface. I chose to face them head-on, armed with the evidence of a betrayal that had been as systematic as it was personal. The final act was not one of dramatic retribution or emotional breakdown, but a quiet determination to reclaim my life through the power of truth. As the days turned into weeks, I moved forward with a steady focus. The investigation had ended, and the reality of Emily's choices was laid bare. There was no grand climax, only the clear, undeniable fact that our lives had taken separate paths. In that realization, I found not defeat, but the strength to begin anew. The mystery was solved, the deception exposed, and in the silence that followed, I began the slow process of rebuilding, one fact at a time, one day at a time. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Got thoughts or experiences you'd like to share? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.